Howdy, howdy, y'all. Welcome back to some Antics. It's been some time. And because it's been some time, if you notice any technical issues, please let me know in the chat. It's always a weird thing of like coming back to streaming after some time. But it's great to have y'all. Welcome to everyone who's made it. I see Aaron, I see Brent, I see Homer, I see Evan. Thank y'all so much for being here. Welcome to the first Semantic stream of 2023. I am thrilled to be introducing Mike Mai to the stream. Mike, hello. Welcome.
Hello.
It
Hello,
is
everybody.
great to have you. I've been like following your tweets for a while. And I have a feeling I am about to learn so much from you. So for anyone who's watching who doesn't know who you are, would you like to introduce yourself?
Of course. Yeah. So I am Mike Mai. I am a web designer. That's what I tell everyone. Basically, what I do. I come from a graphic design background. So I got my graphic design degree from Massachusetts College of Art and Design back in 2009. And since then, I've been doing web design kind of over the past more 10 plus years. I self-taught myself about HTML and CSS. So right now, I'm also doing a lot of front-end development. So currently, I am a lead design technologist at Y Media Labs, so YML. Uh, and we are a creative agency that makes websites and apps. And chat, let us know if you are hearing any kind of echoes.
Yeah, we think there may be some weird echo stuff going on. We're hearing that folks say audio is good, so
Nice.
hopefully that means hopefully that means we can proceed without issue. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, so you've been doing design for a while, and it seems like from a lot of the stuff that you do, like typography is very core to the stuff that you do. Do you want to kind of talk about that a bit?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, like I said, I come from a graphic design background. So typography is a huge part of what I do. I think typography is the most important aspect of graphic design. So I'm very passionate about typography. And setting type on the web isn't exactly easy. That's why I love getting into the nitty gritty details of creating great typography on the web.
So why is typography important? Like, I could go out and find some fonts that like look decent, right? Like why what makes typography so important in your mind?
Yeah. So first thing first, you can see this on my website as well. 99% of the web is text. I don't have any data to back that up. I'm just guessing. There's a lot of text on the web, and if you don't make the text look good to the reader, then you're not getting your message through. When you have good typography, you're making things more legible, uh, much easier to read, and you're getting your message across more effectively.
Absolutely. And like when typography goes wrong, like it goes wrong. Like I have
Yes.
noticed on sites that I frequent often that when the typography is just slightly underwhelming, it can make the whole page just an absolute slog to get through, I've noticed.
Yeah. There's a lot of small details in typography that you can do to enhance the legibility and readability of your text. Like something as simple as leading, or what you call line height in CSS. Like if you have a really tight line height, that's gonna make your entire paragraph of text really hard to read. And then if you have like all caps for certain aspect of your text, and if your tracking or your letter spacing is really tight there, that will also make the text really hard to read. On top of like all caps is already hard to read.
Absolutely. Yeah, so I'm excited to dive into this. I know you've prepared like a just absolutely fantastic run through of things, so I don't want to take too much time away from that. So, What do you say we go ahead and dive into this?
Yeah, sure.
All right. So, you sent me ahead of time a code pen. Yeah, actually, would you like to kind of just walk me through just generally what the plan is today?
Okay, got it. Yeah, so the pen you're looking at right here is basically just a simple article. I post some content from Wikipedia and fandom on the topic of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, which I'm wearing today as well. Um, so we're just gonna style this article, which has a lot of elements in there, like lists, headings, figure, and all kinds of stuff that you would normally normally see in an article. So we're gonna style this whole page today with some modern CSS, and we'll at the end we're gonna make it much nicer to read than what you're seeing right here, which is the browser default.
Yeah, and there's a bit of a surprise here at the end too because this isn't English. So one of the things that really excited me about bringing you on is you are one of the few people I've ever seen talk about like typography from an internationalization angle. And so that's part of what we'll be talking about too, right? Is like how to do this when it's not just English on the mind.
Yeah, exactly. Typography, like the things that I learned in school is really specific to English typography. And what I find is a lot of those things don't apply in Chinese. I'm not sure about Japanese or Korean. I imagine it's very similar as well. So we'll go into a little bit of that, how to fine tune your CSS for CJK characters.
Right. Cool. So uh where should we get started?
Let's get started with, let me explain a little bit about the HTML first.
Sounds great.
So everything we're doing today, we're doing semantic HTML. There's no div whatsoever. I don't want to see any div in today's work. Everything is semantic HTML. So you will see in the structure there's header, there's main, there's footer, and then within each one there's the headings, the paragraphs, the figure, the list, and all of those things. Everything is written in semantic HTML.
All right. I love to see it. I am a little notorious for having created a whole brand based on a pun about semantics.
Yeah. I thought
So
that would be very appropriate for today's stream.
absolutely, and I think one of the things that we'll see right is that like uh there's semantic markup provides a whole lot in the way of like providing extra context around like inline text, right? There are so many inline text level semantics that cleanly map or fairly cleanly map to a lot of actual like typographical conventions, right? And
Yes.
so
Yes.
I imagine that's going to really help today.
Yep. Yep. Definitely. Yeah. Let's get started in the CSS then.
Sounds good. Let me go ahead and adjust my windows real quick. Um, and we won't be showing too much of the I don't think we'll be going back and forth to the HTML a whole lot, but feel
Yep.
free to call out if we need to be looking at any of that in particular. But yeah, so looking at the
Okay.
CSS, I see a whole lot of like cascade layers, which is super fun.
Yeah. Yeah.
Lots
So
of stubbing out that we're gonna do.
for the purpose of today's stream, I kind of broke it down into a couple of layers so I can like write the CSS in order. Normally, I wouldn't do this. You're gonna see the repeating layers as you go through the CSS file, but normally I wouldn't organize like this. I just do it for the stream today, so we can go line by line and uncommon the CSS here.
Okay.
And yeah, and you guys have already learned about CSS layers in previous streams, so I don't need to go too deep into that. I recommend all of you to go back into the history and look at the past streams about CSS layers.
I'm gonna share the link to that for yes. Um, yes, we have done Mayank actually came on they showed off cascade layers. So if you're curious about what this tech is, that's a fantastic stream to go catch up on.
Yep.
Cool.
Okay.
All right.
Cool. So the first thing that I do when setting type on the web, and that would be making the typography fluid. So this is number one line here. So if you go to the first line here under fluid type, you can uncomment that line right there with the font size, and we'll talk
Right.
about that.
Ooh. No. Oh,
All right.
the fork. Oh no. Okay. I can't fork it, but that's fine. Um, so
Oh,
this
does it
is
work?
on the you what?
Did it work?
Let's find out. What is this? So this is applied on root, so this should have applied to everything.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
it's
okay.
working.
It's very subtle, but as
Yep.
I change the yeah, there it is.
There you go. Okay.
So why fluid type?
Yeah, so fluid typography is something that I think is very important for for legibility. Really, I think when the typography is not fluid, when you're looking at 16 pixel font size in like your mobile device, that might look fine. And then if you have a huge screen monitor for your desktop, and you're looking at the same 16 pixel font size, that's gonna look a little bit too small for you. You might have to like um, lean toward your monitor to actually read the text better. So I believe the fluid typography would solve that problem by proportionally scaling up everything. So that's basically what it's doing here. And there are ways to handle fluid typography. This way, I'm handling here with the clamp, the CSS clamp method. You can also get it wrong and make things inaccessible. So it's very important to understand what's going on here. So here I'm setting the font size on the at the root level. So all the values are in percentage. So 100% equals 16 pixels. So that's the min I'm setting here. And then 150 percent, that's 1.5 times 16,
That's 24, right?
20, 20. Is it 20 or 24?
Oh, it's 20. Wait,
Yeah,
no,
20.
1.5. It would be 24. Yeah,
Oh,
because
24.
16
Yeah,
plus 8.
24 pixel. So this clamp is controlling the base font size from 16 pixel to 24 pixels. And then in between, that is the ideal value. So here is something that could go wrong. If you were to put just a viewport value in here, like what you see on MDN, they have an example of like, I think VW in the ideal value there, that could actually make things inaccessible, because at some point your text won't be able to scale beyond let's say 200%
Right.
of the base font size. So you don't want to just use a viewport value there. You want to include at least like if you're doing it in RAM, you want to use RAM plus a viewport value. If you're doing it in AM, you use an M value plus viewport value. In this case, I am using percentage because I'm doing it on the root level. So I'm using 90% plus 0.5 viewport inline size. So you will notice throughout this whole CSS file, I'm using logical CSS properties and logical CSS values um, to account for the things that we're going to talk about later on with things setting in Chinese, Japanese, and Korea.
I'll go ahead and see if I can find an example of that. But um,
Yeah, a lot of these
yeah,
things,
yeah, here we go.
it's just
Here's some
like
examples.
getting used to logical CSS rather than the old CSS of like width, height, and left, right, top, and bottom. Getting used to that convention of inline versus block. Once you use those values, you don't have to like write specific CSS for like specific language or specific
Mhm.
writing mode.
Yeah. So
Okay.
we've actually already got a few questions in the chat. A few people want to
Yeah.
know, like, Does this clamp like will this scale if the user has changed like their default font size in their browser? So if
Yeah.
they've set it to be, maybe they want it default 30 pixels or something like that. Does this scale appropriately with that?
Yeah, so this will play with your browser's font size setting. So that's the important thing to remember about the root. When you're setting font size in the root, you always use percentage, and that will allow the browsers to adjust the font size. If you're
Gotcha.
setting this in pixel, it will always be in that pixel value. Then, yeah, you have to do percentage in the root.
Good deal. Okay. Cool. So yeah, now we've got something that's a little more comfortable, on mobile versus on like very wide screens. It actually like it feels like it scales very appropriately for okay.
Yeah, and this is as far as I would go for fluid typography. I see a lot of people doing like individual clamps for headings as well. I think that's overkill. I think just doing it at the root is it's gonna be good 99% of the time. I'm sure there are like edge cases that you might do on like like a beautiful landing page. You might do some more clamping there, but 99% of the time designing user interfaces, this should be all set.
Gotcha. Very
Okay.
cool. Okay.
So yeah, the next thing that we're gonna handle is leading. If you uncomment the line height there, that will increase the leading a little bit and make things a little easier to read. So the browser default is what you're looking at here is Times New Roman. When when you say Times New Romans, people will just like, I think a lot of people will just like that font, that ugly font. But the thing is like I don't think it's that ugly. You can actually make it work. So a lot of the CSS we're doing here today, the first 80 or 70% of it, I'm not going to change the font family. I'm going to use Times New Roman as to its best, to its whatever you can do. Like I don't want to change that until I absolutely have to.
Yeah.
So here,
Absolutely.
so
I
I
think
include, yeah.
I think that's like one thing I've noticed, right? Is like typography always feels like, it's so much better when you do minimal changes that like if you're doing a whole bunch of one-offs that seem right individually, they add up into something that feels inconsistent and messy. And incoherent in a way. So I like this notion of like being very surgical with it, right? And not doing a whole bunch of one-off things.
Yeah, and also, yeah, also the point I want to get across here is by using system fonts, you're actually making things more accessible, making things more performant because it's not taking any more data to load a system font. You're also doing good to the environment by not sending that much data just on fonts. Yeah,
Yeah, and
so
I'm
yeah.
also I'm finding a link to this as well, but previously had type designer Bruno Mag on the stream, and one of the things that like he talked about was that um familiarity is a really big thing in uh typographic accessibility, right? Like we could talk like day in day out about, oh, what fonts are the most accessible, but like by and large the two biggest factors it seems like consistently in whether type is readable are how familiar someone is with the font and then the line height, right? The leading. Uh Especially when we talk about like dyslexic users, there's kind of this like notion of like people will talk about like dyslexic friendly fonts like dyslexie
Mhm.
or open dyslexic, and some dyslexic people do find those fonts helpful, many don't, right? No
Yeah.
study has consistently shown reproducibly that these fonts actually consistently help dyslexic users. Um, and really, what benefits most dyslexic people most reliably, most often, is just using a font that they'll be familiar with and, having a sensible line height.
Yeah, exactly. Good typography will take care of a lot of things.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So
So how
here
did you
is
land
we
on
increase the line height.
1.35? Is that just something you've plucked from memory? Is that, like, how did you know that one?
Yeah, so this number should be different depending on what font you're using, because every font has a different X height. So X height is the height of the character X. So that will depend on the X height. So if you have a larger X height in your font, then you want to increase the leading, the line height. So here
Okay.
I am giving this a little more breathing room by increasing it to 1.35 as opposed to, I think the browser default is 1.25 or something. So you see a little bit of increase on the line height
Yeah.
here.
Have I gone to like 1.5? Like this starts to feel like maybe this
Too
stretches
much.
the limit of what I'd be comfortable with, but it's like
Yeah.
it's stretching it, right? Everything feels
Yeah.
looser.
A lot of people use 1.5 blindly for whatever font they're using. They think, oh, 1.5 is the golden standard, but that's not the case. You really need to look at the X height of your font and then try to figure out that number there.
And Aaron in the chat actually calls out like this is why you should make sure that your fallback font has the same X height, because otherwise it's gonna, seem weird with things like line height and whatnot.
Yeah, yeah. Not only about things looking weird, but you also get some kind of content shift, and that's one of the one of the biggest things that you should not do in web design is like making your content shift.
Ooh. I'm also seeing a few people say that 1.5 is the WCAG recommendation, apparently.
Yeah, I think they have recommendations on that, but you really do need to look at the font you're using. Like guidelines are just guidelines. What's really accessible is through testing with real users and getting the what's best for your user rather than just like checking a box in a guideline.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure. All right.
Okay. So yeah, let's move a little faster. I think we
Oh,
might
yeah.
be yeah, we might be getting we might be running out of time. So for the next few things, I think we can just uncomment them and we can talk about that. They're very basic things that we can just fly through. Yeah, let's
Absolutely.
comment about
So we've made
three,
it auto
four,
dark
five,
mode.
six. Yeah,
And then what else do we want to do? Do we want to, yep, maybe we just go ahead and
yeah.
handle number 4 as well?
Just get 4, 5, 6 out of the way.
Okay.
The basic resets that I use, and I can talk a little bit about those.
Whoa. What is, oh, was that the smoothing? Hang on. I want to
Yeah,
see, I want to compare this.
you actually
Wow.
won't see it that much in Times New Roman, but with well, yeah, you do see a little bit of that. So yeah, the resets that I'm doing here is basically trying to let the font be how it was designed. If you don't use this feature, it will, as you can see, it's kind of doing a little bit of fake bold. It's adding a little bit to the font that it was not intended in the design. So I'm trying to reset these things to make it uh, stay true to how it was designed. And then you can see the rendering very similar across different browsers and different devices. You're not going to see the font looking bolder in another browser. If you don't reset this, then that would happen. Like it will depend on how the browser render that text, and then you might see differences between across browsers.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, because I have to imagine like type designers probably building their fonts under some very ideal circumstances, right? And like if you use it the way it's like meant to be used, right, you'll have well designed stuff. And browsers are compensating for, oh, they're trying to like smooth things over,
Yeah.
and stuff like that, and that can lead to a font being used out of its context.
Yeah, and
Okay.
and the kerning feature there, it's also like trying to stay true to how the font is designed. Type designers, build in the kerning within each font. So I'm trying to use whatever the intended design is. So I'm setting the kerning feature there. The other resets are pretty standard. We have the border box and then the auto dark mode.
Good deal. All right.
Cool. Okay, so the next thing that I would take care of in terms of typography, as you can see on the left in the preview here, everything is because you have dark mode enable. So this page will automatically go to dark mode. And now the next
Yeah.
thing that I want to take care of is the focus outline. So anything that's focusable, I'm using focus visible here. So take care of keyboard focus rather than clicking on something with your mouse. So you will see this outline being changed to a color that I want to use as the brand color. And here I'm using just the CSS crimson color. I love this color because it has above 3:1 color contrast ratio against either black or white. So I can use this
Oh,
color as the border color for a lot of things.
makes sense. Yeah, absolutely. Less you have to change in each mode, which is good. Again, like a whole lot of like just great typography as being minimally invasive, doing or sorry, like being just incredibly surgical with a lot of this and not doing a whole bunch of one-off things.
Yeah. Yeah, so the next few things is around this crimson color. So I'm enabling the selection color to be crimson. So if you select text, you can also get that little crimson color there.
Okay.
Yeah, and the next one is the links. Here I am trying to get a little fancy with the links. So if you uncommon these things, you will see that I'm using a wavy underline, and I am giving that a crimson color as well.
Good deal. I like this move of having the like I mean, first of all, I'm very glad you're keeping the underlines because that is a whole debate within
Yeah,
accessibility spaces, of course, but um you're you're still keeping things fairly legible by making the underline a distinct color, actually your brand color in this page.
yeah.
Um you're keeping them distinct so it doesn't just like all muddle together the text and the underline.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, next, and just a little detail on the hover style and the focus style. So on hover, I'm changing the underline to the current color. So as you can see with this whole CSS file, I'm trying to stay away from changing any color at all, other than defining crimson here for certain things. Everything else, because I'm using the auto dark mode, I don't want to change the text color. I don't want to change the background color. I just want the browser to handle that with the dark mode colors.
Absolutely. Yeah, if I had I mean, I'm just gonna use this to simulate turning off dark mode. Like this
Yeah,
still works, right? Like it's still the same red underlines, but all the colors have changed.
exactly. Yeah, as you can
All right.
see, after like how many lines of CSS of that is like around 50 lines of CSS. The page itself is already starting to look kind of good, I have to say. So I
Yeah,
think like if I'll say this, if you think it looks good already, you can stop there. Like there's no need for you to go any further if you think the typography is already looking good. But if you want to do more, then of course you can go on and define more CSS. But the thing to remember here is the less CSS, the better. That's how I operate. Like if you can write less code, that's great. Like just write less damn code. That's my
absolutely.
memo.
I think like here's the thing. This I already think this looks worlds better than it was, you know. Like this is an article I could envision myself reading at this point.
Yeah, exactly. And to average person out there, and you present this to them, and can they really tell this is Times New Roman or any kind of font? They don't really care. I don't think they would care as long as it looks good and
Mhm.
it's legible to them.
Absolutely. Right.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
next up, I see we've got a few
yeah.
CSS custom properties here. You want to kind of talk through what we're doing here?
Yeah, so next I'm setting up some design tokens that I generally use in each web project. Like I said, I come from a graphic design background, so a lot of these things kind of relate to graphic design. I have the gutter variable here, which takes care of the spacing horizontally. Horizontally, yes, horizontally. So in between columns, that's
Okay.
the gutter spacing. So I am doing this using the character value. So it's something I'm experimenting with. This is okay to do in an article design. It's not really good to do in interface design. You might get some weird results using character values here. So that's the horizontal spacing. We also have the stack spacing. That's the vertical spacing. The vertical. So in between headings and text, lists and text, that's the stack spacing there. And I'm using
And
the X height for that. The reason I'm doing
that is
that,
the height of the X letter, right? The
yeah,
lowercase
yeah,
x.
exactly.
Yeah.
The reason I'm doing that, like I said before, every font has a different X height. I want to make a connection to that. So if in any case I change the font for the page, it will adapt to that X height.
That makes sense. And so you've used gutter and stack, which are pretty like design typography heavy terminologies, but
Yeah,
it seems like this maps in my mind as someone who would not consider themselves a designer, right? This would map to inline spacing and block space.
yeah, exactly.
Okay, cool. And both
Cool.
of these are also fluid, so they will adjust as you
Yep.
resize the browser.
Yep, I'm using clamp here just to get that. If you have less vertical space or less horizontal space, you can get the content to a little bit more compact.
Yeah. And then also it does seem to me like a pretty key thing here is uh this is a pretty minimal delta between 2.5 characters and 3 characters.
Yep.
Now the font is resizing, so it's a little bigger than this would make it seem, but that like this is a subtle thing. You are not adding
Yes,
in
very
gobs and
subtle.
gobs of extra space.
Yeah. Yep, exactly.
Gotcha. Okay. And then let's talk about
And
line
next,
lengths. You've
yeah,
done
line
70
length.
characters?
Usually the comfortable line length is between 55 to 75. So I experiment with numbers in between those two. So for Times New Roman, I think 70 is pretty good. And we'll see it later on once we define that the max width of the article will adapt to that 70 character width. And
All
then
right.
the next one, the list, the order list style. So here I am defining it just in case I need to do CJK characters later, which I will change that decimal to something else that adapts more to CJK. So we'll see that
Gotcha.
later.
Okay. Cool.
All right.
So now
So
looks like we're gonna.
yeah,
Oh, I'm sorry. Go for it.
yeah. So those are just variable we created. They are not in effect yet until we use them. So let's go through and uncomment more things and let's see what happens.
I just kind of
So
want to see
these
what happens.
two,
Okay, you are fully resetting all
yeah,
the margins and paddings.
there we go. Yeah, now you're really resetting everything. The
Gotcha.
reason I told you earlier, if you think it looks good, just stop there. But now you're kind of at a point of no return because you you are resetting everything. Now you really need to massage everything on your own. So here, the next one, this is the line length. The old way of doing this is setting the max inline size and then the margin auto on either side, which will center the article within the page. So as you can see, now the page is about, the article is about 70 character wide and it's center on the page.
What's nice about this too is as I like resize this, I'm not getting a like change. Like words aren't jumping from line to line too.
Yep.
I have to go pretty small before that starts to happen.
Yeah, once you reach that max inline size, it will stay there because it's counting the characters. It's not counting RAM. It's not counting pixel, which might change it, which shift your text around. But with character, you're not changing that around. Everything is scaling with the fluid typography. Everything is scaling up proportionally.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is good. Liking this. I
Yeah,
mean, there's still definitely some things to tweak. We need to like restore some spacing, but
yeah,
yeah. So you're applying that to just the full body. You're saying the full body here is going to be the line length. I could
yeah.
see a case where if you needed a heading where like the background of the headings, sorry, header. That's what I'm looking for. Like a header that
Mhm.
stretched across the page. You maybe wouldn't necessarily apply this to the body per se, but
Exactly.
you could apply it to like an article wrapper around the content.
Yeah. So that's the next thing. So this
Oh,
is the old way
oh,
of
look
doing
at
it.
that.
The next thing is the new way of doing it, which involves a little bit of math. So let's comment out the old way and see how this new way works.
Okay.
So it works exactly the same. You're not going to see any difference until we do something else. But basically, I'm only using padding in line to handle the max width of the content. The math I'm doing here is so I'm setting it on the header, main, and footer. So I'm setting the padding in line to be um, to be 100 viewport inline size minus whatever's available space allows. It's either the line length or 80% of the viewport inline size. And then divided that by 2. That is exactly the math you need to get the padding on either side of the article. Um, it's exactly
Oh,
working
yeah.
the same as what the old way was doing, which was using margin. But this way, imagine you're setting this value to a CSS variable. Now you can actually use it as padding. You can use it as margin. You can use it for
Oh,
whatever you want to do. Like it
okay.
opens a lot more doors for you
Because
to manage
yeah,
your layout.
I think of like, oh, every time I've just like set this as a margin or padding without thinking much about it, right? I invariably run into the problem of like, oh, well, I want a full bleed treatment now. One that like spans the, oh gosh, sorry to hit the microphone. Hopefully that wasn't a bad sound. But something that spans the entire width of the page, but I've already set, some margins on the parent or something like that that make that
Yeah,
just so much harder than it needs to be.
yeah, yeah. Once that becomes a CSS variable, there's a lot of things you can play with.
Absolutely. Okay. Gonna go ahead and uncomment the block padding.
Yeah,
And so this is an example of we're using logical properties here. So for anyone who's unfamiliar, inline refers to basically the spacing between words and characters. So in English, that translates to left and right. And then block is like the spacing between lines of text. And so that would be top and bottom.
yeah, exactly.
We're setting for English at least, and that's a bit of foreshadowing, I suppose. The left and right padding be relative to the line length, then the top and bottom for English to be 5% of the
Yeah, so this is 5V max, which is looking for both the viewport height and viewport width, whichever is the biggest. So
Oh,
5%
okay.
of either the height of or the width. I love using the V max value because it can't, I really think the spacing is more it takes care of like a lot of spacing issues in your design. So you can like squeeze your content a little bit. It'll reference the most, like whether you are looking at a portrait or landscape, it's referencing the longest side to set the spacing,
Yeah.
which will allow the content to breathe more.
It's
You have
cool.
more spacing for your content to breathe and
That
make it more.
is that is so nifty. And just to show off, because we've got headers, mains, and footers going on, I'm just gonna add like a 1 pixel solid. I tend to use tomato for the outline. Um, But yeah, so we've got like this top chunk here is our heading that we've applied these paddings. Got a main that we're applying. Got I'm guessing this is a footer and yeah,
Yep, yep,
got more chunks. But
yep, exactly.
uh yeah, so that, just so you can see kind of where these paddings are getting applied.
Yeah, and you can actually see I'm setting the border next.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Let's do it.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So next, I
So,
am doing a little fancy border here, which is a border gradient. So now you will see a gradient border across in between the sections here.
that's cool. That looks awesome. Um and so this is linear gradient, and unfortunately, like I see you're doing the two right, and unfortunately
Yeah,
that linear gradients aren't logical properties yet. But here it doesn't matter because it's
yeah,
all symmetrical anyways.
yeah. That's one thing. That is one property that you would have to change if you're changing your changing your writing direction. So yeah, just watch out for any kind of CSS that's not logical. Then you do have some work to do when you change
Yep.
your writing direction.
All right.
Okay.
It seems like next we're diving into bits that are like sub
Yeah.
bits of the prose, right? Like lists and figures and
Yeah.
uh yeah.
Yeah, so here I am just trying to set some standard spacing in between block elements. So if you uncomment these, you will see the standard stack spacing in between the each paragraph, each piece of heading, uh, list, and all those things. And here the second one, I am resetting that margin for things that are nested inside order list or unordered list.
Oh, yeah, okay. Because we've got this list here on the left, and
Yeah,
this I didn't actually realize it at first. This is a
yeah,
sub
that's
list
nested.
of adaptation process.
Yeah,
We want those things to be grouped because they are the same thing. They're just this is a sub list of that. Okay.
yeah, yeah. So once you reset all your spacing, there's a lot of nuances you need to get through. That's why I said you reset everything now. There's no, it's that's the point of no return. You have to fine tune everything now.
Yeah.
So yeah, next, basically I'm setting the indent here for list item. You're not gonna see this until later when that variable has some kind of value
Okay.
for Chinese characters, because the hanging punctuation thing in typography, that's really just for English. That's not for Chinese or any kind of Asian characters. So we don't want to do that in those languages. So I'm setting up a variable here in case I need to undo the hanging punctuation on bullets, on quotes, and those all those things. So later we'll come back to this. And then next, pretty similar. I'm setting using the same variable, but here for English, I am indenting that nested list. So as you can see under adaptation process, now that nested list has some kind of indent to push the second level in a little bit.
Yeah, and you're reusing your gutter here, so
Yeah,
everything feels very harmonized with the rest of the page. This isn't a bespoke custom value. It's the same logic you're applying elsewhere.
yep, exactly.
Nice.
And then
Okay.
next, we're doing a little bit of traditional typography here. I'm gonna set paragraph indents rather than paragraph spacing throughout this whole article. So that's what this is doing. I am opening each paragraph with an indent rather than spacing. So you can see in between paragraph, you're not going to see any spacing. So the thing about how to indicate a paragraph is that these two ways, either paragraph indent or paragraph spacing. You never use both of them. You only choose one of them. It's like wearing belts and suspenders. If you're wearing a belt, you don't need suspenders. They both function the same way. They do the same thing. You don't need both. So today I'm doing some traditional typography here. So I'm setting paragraph indent.
Okay. And is there like, do you just generally prefer the indent approach over the spacing approach, or is it kind of a depends on a case by case basis thing?
I think I prefer the indent more than the spacing, but in reality, 99% of the sites that I design is probably gonna benefit from paragraph spacing because
Okay,
indents are much harder to do than than paragraph spacing.
sure.
As you can see here, I have to like there are certain rules you have to follow. If a paragraph is following a heading, you don't want to indent there. So that's what the next thing is doing. So any heading that's followed by a paragraph, I want to remove the indents.
Okay.
And then the next thing that I love doing, I don't think a lot of people are doing, is kind of fine tuning the spacing between heading and paragraph. If you set the same spacing between paragraph and use that same spacing on heading and paragraph, that's gonna generate too much spacing between a heading and a paragraph, and your content, your information hierarchy is getting thrown off by that. So this is basically what I'm doing here is adjusting that spacing a little bit between heading and paragraph, and you can see that the first one is about going from a paragraph to a heading. I'm giving it more room there to start another section. If you're using another heading, you're starting another section. So I'm giving you more room to breathe there, trying to group the content together a little better. And then the next one is basically taking care of a heading followed by a paragraph. So now you can see I'm pulling the heading in a little bit when it's touching a paragraph of text. So you can see there's a lot of spacing from a paragraph to a heading, and then less spacing from a heading to a paragraph.
Yeah, it's a subtle thing, but it just pulls it
Yeah,
in a little, makes it very clear that the paragraph is like part of the section. Yeah. Okay.
yeah, exactly. And then next, this can be set up here or set up like way before in the beginning as well. I'm just setting up some a type scale. So here, I mentioned something in something that I released in recently called the Typography manual. So if you're not familiar with typography and you don't know how to set a type scale, you can just Google traditional point sizes, and it will give you Wikipedia will give you a list of point sizes to work with, and all you have to do is convert that to RAM value, like I'm doing here, and just like use that scale. That's being used in a lot of print materials, and yeah, just try that out. There are different values for you to try. I'm picking six of them to plug it in here.
Can you all may understand the reasoning behind doing 3.999 instead of 4 rem?
Yeah, so that is just a conversion between a point size to a RAM value. So I'm just keeping whatever like down to the three digits, like trying to get more precise. You don't really need to do this. You can do 4 RAM, you can do 3 RAM. You don't really need to get into the decimal like I am doing here. I'm just trying to be
Gotcha.
more staying true to those point sizes.
Gotcha. Okay. Cool. And
Yeah.
so now we're just gonna use those. So
Yep.
all of the different headings have their various
Exactly.
font sizes. Actually, here's a question I've got. I'm just gonna go ahead and go through this and comment all of these. But um, so for the purposes of today, we are applying font sizes directly to headings, like the heading selectors themselves. I know of quite a few people who generally avoid like targeting headings directly because they're worried that content authors are going to use like abuse that to uh have headings that are out of order and stuff like that because they just want to like show some big text. Do you
Yep.
typically find yourself styling the tags directly, or do you prefer typically like in a real world environment to go through some like middleman API like classes or for headings?
Yep, I definitely use classes if this was like client project, I wouldn't I would never style the text directly. I only do this for personal project where I am just going classless. You can see in a lot of my side projects, I just don't write any classes. I try to use semantic elements as much as possible and not use any classes. So just like in today's demo, I'm not using any classes here. So for today's demo, that's fine. But in in real projects, try not to do this.
That's yeah. Yeah. So now I'm trying to find
There we
a
go. Yeah.
good example of yeah, like the choosing a Sentai. You know, like this is clearly smaller than the adaptation process. Like the hierarchy is now clearly visually conveyed again, which is excellent.
Yeah. And then the next thing I would do is fine tune the leading of those headings. As you can see, when the headings were wrapping into a second line, you were seeing a lot of spacing because the whole
Yeah.
document was set in 1.35. But now, if I fine tune it, then your multi line headings are going to read better without so much spacing in between.
Absolutely. Okay. Yeah, that's a huge improvement. Okay.
Yeah, so those are the refinements I would do to headings. A lot of people don't do that, and it's one of my biggest pet peeves. Is like, can you please refine refine your headings? Yeah, so
Yeah.
those are the things that you can do to headings.
All right. Now looks like we're gonna do some stuff with the page title here.
Yeah,
Uppercase add
so
a slight crimson shadow to it.
yeah, this is just a little bit opinionated thing that I'm adding here just for this demo. I just want to showcase for the page heading. I wanted to a little bit different than all the headings of the document. Normally, I wouldn't set all caps for that much text. I'm just doing it for this demo just to
Yeah.
stand out a little bit.
Yeah. And I think I feel like you and I have to be so careful when we're talking about capitalization, right? Because like it it's one of those things where I don't want to say never do all caps, but it's one of those where it's like, oh, you gotta be very careful about how and when you do it. Um,
Yep.
Now something for the page title when it's, a short phrase is probably fine. A few CTAs, maybe, but it does make it less readable for people who are visually impaired because now like everything is like the words are just blocks, right? They don't have
Yep.
distinct shapes anymore. And also, even when you're using CSS for um, like all caps, screen readers and other assistive technologies will still receive the text in all caps. And this can
Yep.
lead to sometimes the screen reader announcing your all caps words as like initialisms, where it'll spell out every letter, which is also not an ideal experience. So, this is the kind of thing where it's like use very, very carefully, perhaps, and don't abuse it.
Yep, exactly. This is just for
All right.
today's demo. Remember
Yeah,
that.
absolutely.
Yeah, so I think we can uncomment the next few things and we can quickly go over those. So here I am basically setting up the lead text. What that means is that first paragraph following the page title, that's the lead text. So I'm increasing the font size there a little bit, so you can see a clear opening to the article. And I'm gonna add a little bit of drop cap to that paragraph. So that's the next thing that you can uncommon, and you're gonna see a drop cap in that first paragraph. Yeah, as you can see, I'm using a lot of conditional CSS here. Normally, don't do this. Try to use classes in the real project.
Yeah, I noticed very specifically that this is English only, right? You are
Yeah,
asserting that if this isn't like if this is Chinese, for instance, right? Like
yeah.
you would not drop cap. I assume that drop caps just aren't really a convention in this in China.
Yeah, normally we don't really use drop caps. You could use it. That's not to say never use it, but generally you don't like Chinese people don't expect drop caps.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yep. So you
Okay.
have a drop cap here. Next, just a little fine tuning on the superscript. As you can see you see the 1, 2, 3 on the left here with the superscript. It's very
Yeah.
subtle. It is kind of throwing off the leading of that particular sentence. That sentence there, it has more spacing than the other sentences. So I'm resetting the line height of those superscript there to make sure it doesn't mess up the leading, the line height of the whole paragraph. And there you go, fixed.
Hey,
And here now we're getting into a different font. Like I said, if you like what you see with Times New Roman, you really don't need to do anything more. But if you want to change to a sans serif font, the next best thing to use is the System UI font, which will call for San Francisco on Macs. And then I forgot what it is on Windows and Androids and
Seago,
other.
right? I think
Yeah.
it's Seago.
Yeah. I think it's that. They all look pretty good, so that's the next best thing to use if you want to switch to a sans serif font. And as you can see here, because San Francisco is a variable font, now I can actually play with the font weight of San Francisco. And one very subtle thing that I do when I'm using San Francisco is I try to use 300 rather than the default 400. It does look a little better in dark mode, and it still looks fine in light mode. So I try to use 300 when I'm using San Francisco.
I'm gonna try to see what this looks like in light mode, just because it's been a while since we've
Yeah,
done it. But I would say that still looks fine. It might be a little on the thinner end, but
yeah,
for me personally, at least, it's fine.
yeah. So if you think that's the case, you can like leave it at 400, but using the prefer color scheme dark, set it to 300. Because looking
Yeah, let's
at
do that
white
real
text
quick, actually.
against looking at white text against black background is a lot different than looking at black text against a white background. So you can refine that with the media query to just do this in dark mode.
Do I need the screen part? I'm never sure. Prefers. Oh God, what?
I don't write that. Yeah,
Okay, is this it? I am basically gambling on. I might like I.
I think you got it right. Prefer.
Let's see. I
I think
think
so. I
that's
think
what.
that worked. Yeah,
I think we got it. Okay, cool. Yeah, because like the when you're in when you're in light mode, right? You do kind of need thicker text, because
yeah,
otherwise, I feel like no matter what, the light is going to stand out with a little more acuity, than the dark colors, you know?
yeah,
And so when you have like light mode, the white background swallows up the text. When you have dark mode, the light text just kind of burns out of it, right? So it does
yeah,
make sense to tweak the font weight depending on the
yeah. So
right.
that's that. And now I'm going through all the headings and try to use 900. I love bold sans serif headings. That's why what I'm doing here, setting all the headings to 900 font weight. So as you can see, the headings are carrying a lot more weight now.
Absolutely. And
And then
and
this is
oh,
a
there we
cool thing
go.
about cool thing about San Francisco. It actually comes with condensed and expanded. So in this case, I'm using condensed. You can also set that to expand it to get a more wider letters. But I love the condensed variant of the San Francisco. Yeah. The reason I
Gotcha.
asked you to use Safari today is because this only works in Safari. It doesn't work in
Ah.
anything else. So don't try to do this in a production website. But you can start to mess around with it. San Francisco is really good font.
Yeah. We have a question from the chat actually about the system fonts. Evan wants to know what happens when you hit a system font that's not variable, set a weight it doesn't have. And he's asking because
Yeah.
he uses Linux.
Yeah. So when a number font weight value doesn't exist, it will try to get to the nearest weight that is defined by like bold, bolder. I think whatever's defined in CSS with the actual word. So if you're setting 300, it will just default back to 400 because nothing goes lower than 400 in the in the old way of setting weight. If you're writing 600, that will just default to 700 because there's between 400 and 700, there's nothing in between. You can only do 500 and 600 with variable fonts, but with a regular font, there's nothing in between. It will just go to the next available one, the closest available one.
That's
Yeah.
I gotta say, like, I know we're using system fonts here, and we haven't pulled in anything custom, but like already this page feels distinct and branded in a way. You
Yeah.
know, like this feels nice. Like I want to call that out. Like we're using system colors here. We haven't used any bespoke hex codes or anything like that. We haven't pulled in any bespoke fonts. We're just using what the browser already has available to it. This
Yep.
looks really good.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, good typography. You don't need to use custom fonts for good typography. If you have good typography, you have good typography. And the next thing, we'll go back to the opening paragraph. Again, don't do this in a production site where you're doing so much capital letters, but I'm trying to showcase what San Francisco can do. And this is another thing it can do, the font variant small caps. It comes with small caps. So in addition to condensed and expanded type, it comes with all caps, small caps as well. As you can see, this is not all caps. All the you can see in the sentences, they are written in caps, but the first letter is still bigger than the rest of the letters. This is called small caps.
Yeah. Yeah, this probably like honestly, I'm finding this like difficult to read at this point.
Yeah,
I think this is probably a bit too lengthy of copy to use
yeah,
small caps, but very cool to.
yeah.
It looks great. It's just
Yeah,
yeah,
one
at this
one
point,
thing
it's
that I
really
would fine tune if you really insist on using small cap for like opening paragraph, you can actually do the first line. CSS, I forgot what the CSS property is, but you can do first line. So just setting that first line in that first paragraph to use small caps. Yeah, you can do a little research on your own and see. Oh, did that work? No, it didn't work. I forgot what it was. I know it exists.
yeah. I'd have to look it up. It's been a while since I've done
Yeah,
anything like that.
yeah. And as you can see, like I said, when you're setting using all caps or small caps, you gotta increase the tracking, which is the letter spacing, the spacing between each letter. So I'm here I'm trying to add a little bit of spacing, 0.1 character spacing, just to make it
Yeah,
a little easier to read with all caps.
it's amazing just how much of a difference that makes. Like
Yeah,
these two feel so different.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. That's typography for you. It's like tiny little details. And next, because we changed the font, I am also gonna, like I said, each font has a different X height. You have to update your line height because you just changed your font. So for San Francisco, I find 1.45 much easier to work with, much easier to read, just giving it a little bit more room to breathe.
All right. Um. Cool. So I see something that I'm very excited
Yeah,
about next.
yeah, so next we're getting into the Chinese characters. So now you can actually, in the HTML, just comment out all of the English part of the article. Yeah. Oh,
bit too far.
yeah. There we
There.
go. Yeah. Comment that out, and we're only gonna look at Chinese now. Now, like I said, Chinese has a different kind of typography setting. We don't want to do all caps. We don't. I mean, there's no all caps in Chinese. There's also no usually no drop caps. So we're gonna take care of a lot of little refinements here. So the first thing I'm gonna set up is the type scale because Chinese is kind of like monospace. You can see each character is like a perfect square. If you use the same type scale, it's gonna look a little bit too big. So what I'm doing here is redefining that type scale. Um, yeah, let's uncommon everything. I think this won't work in the preview because you have to actually
Okay.
inspect the preview and change the language to Chinese to see it working. Yeah, let's uncommon everything, and we'll see the difference when we change in the preview panel.
You you mean like uncomment all the CSS, right?
Yeah. Uncommon all the
Okay.
CSS.
Yeah. Okay, so here's oh wait, that is that's not CSS.
Yeah, just the CSS part.
Okay. Cool. That's everything. Right?
Okay, so now let's inspect the preview panel, and we're gonna change on the HTML level the lang attribute to Chinese. So you're gonna look into that iframe and the HTML element of that iframe right there in the middle of yeah. So change that to ZH dash HANS.
Does the HANS need to be caps?
No, it should be yeah. Either way, it should be fine. Okay, now let's just make the depth panel a little smaller. Oh yeah, that works. So what you notice is actually the text getting smaller because the whole type scale has changed. And then the drop cap is gone. If you look at the list, I'm actually changing decimal to CJK ideographic. So that is actually
Okay.
using the Chinese numbers. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is using the Chinese number rather than the Arabic numbers. So that's a
Yeah.
little bit refinement there. As you can see, the list indent, there's no hanging punctuation with Chinese text. So you see the list is actually just a regular list that is the bullet is aligning with the text. This looks odd for Chinese because the bullet is also text. It's not a number anymore. It's text. So you don't need to hang that.
Makes sense.
Yeah, and then if we go down a little more, what else am I doing? Okay. Here I'm just redefining the font size to a smaller. So instead of 100%, I'm doing 90%. Just make like I said, the Chinese characters are all perfect square. You want to reduce the font size there to make it a little more legible. Otherwise, it just looks like the whole page is screaming at you.
Yeah, so if I hadn't done this, yeah,
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 much
it's
bigger.
see, I would have thought it would have been the other way around of like, oh, you would need to make it bigger just because the like characters are all so dense. But
Yeah, if
I
you look
hadn't
at any
considered
kind of Chinese websites, they have a very, very condensed design. Like they just jam all kinds of like jam the content together so much because everything's monospace and people get used to that. Like they read
makes
newspaper
sense.
and they're fine with like very compact spacing, and you don't need to set very large text for Chinese. And because the characters are bigger, I'm also increasing the line height there to 1.6. So that way, give it again. Think of reading Chinese as as in reading all caps. You need to give it more room to breathe. So line height 1.6 here will take care of that.
Yeah, and if I hadn't had that, Yeah, that is a wall of
Tight,
white
very tight.
ink. Okay.
Yeah,
I also
and the
noticed
next
that
thing,
the text
yeah,
has the text seems to have some characters in here like the double angle brackets, right? This
yep,
is just by virtue of having used semantic markup, right?
exactly. I'm using the Q element here, which stands for quote. So if you don't want to type quotes, you just use the Q element. That will change your quotes based on language.
Nice.
Yeah. And then the next thing you can see, I'm also changing the gutter. Why am I doing that? Like, uh, so you can see the paragraph indent for each for Chinese is generally set to 2 characters, and that's roughly about 2M. I can't use the character unit here because character stands for the width of the number 0, and that does not equal the actual character of Chinese. So I have to change
Mm.
to M here. So 2M is about, like I said, Chinese character is perfect square. So you use 2M
Yeah.
here, means 2 character.
Yeah, because like the M unit is the width of the lowercase m, and it's explicitly defined that way because the lowercase m is going to consistently be like the full width. Okay, that makes sense. That's a
Yeah,
really cool conversion there. A really good flip there. Whereas English has variable length characters. You could have,
yeah,
things that are as wide as M or as narrow as a lowercase l or I or something like that.
yeah,
Um, you know, Chinese everything seems to be a square. So yeah, you
yeah,
would
exactly.
want everything to be consistently around the square width. Okay. Very cool.
Yeah,
Very cool.
yeah, and the last thing that I did was basically making that image fluid, so we don't end up with an image that's breaking the layout of your page. So I'm setting the max inline size to 100%. So when you squeeze the browser width, it's gonna adapt to 100% of the container there.
Happen.
Yeah, there you go.
Very cool.
Yeah, so that's it. That's it for today's demo. Like we went through and remember, we did not use any custom fonts today. All we did was system fonts and system colors, except for that crimson color. Like you get so much out of whatever you can get that's already on your system. So yeah, just think about all the possibilities with system fonts, system colors before you go into custom fonts, which cost more data to load. It's worse for the environment if you use custom fonts. So yeah, take that into
Yeah,
consideration in your next project.
and like, even just the notion of like, the system fonts are going to be far more likely than whatever font it is you've downloaded from the internet to have expanded characters, right? So if your site needs to adjust into supporting Chinese or Arabic or Hebrew or that, right? Like
Yeah,
your system fonts are more likely to have those character sets handled gracefully, characters that fit the aesthetic kind of
yeah,
out of the box.
yeah. That's it.
All right. Um, so Mike, where should people go if they're interested in learning more about some of these typographic techniques, improving their
Um, yeah, there's let me see. Other than my website, so you can come to my website for a few things. The typography manual that I mentioned, the MCSS that I recently released, which makes use of pretty much what you're seeing today. So setting typography using Georgia system, another system font, and Verdana, which is designed by the famous typographer Matthew Carter. That's why I named this MCSS. So yeah, so you can check this out if you have any kind of like minimal website you want to make. You can just use this little framework, hook it up to your static site generator, write your blog or whatever. Like this thing will be easy to use, and all the typography would be would be all set here. You don't have to worry about uh, setting up your type scale. You don't have to worry about fine tuning your typography. It's all set in here with the font Georgia and Badana.
Hey, and Mike, where can people find you if they want to learn more from you? I've shared the link to your blog. Anywhere else you'd like me to send people?
You can find me on Twitter and Mastodon. Those are really the two platforms that I post regularly. So yeah, probably more Mastodon. Twitter is not it's not great. So Mastodon, just find me. My handle is the same across all the social media platforms. Is Mike Mai, the number two, and then awesome. It's it's a silly name I stick to since high school. I think high school or college. Like, it's a silly name.
That's
I didn't want to change it. Just that's the name everywhere.
nice. All right. Well, it's been wonderful having you on. It's been wonderful learning from you. And so yeah, thank you so much for your time. Um, and chat, thank you so much for being here as well. Thank you for bearing with me as I disappeared into the ether for uh not half a year, but a few months. It's good to be back in the chair. I should be on next week, but I'm still figuring out what I'm gonna do. I may do sort of an AMA and casual chat type thing, but yeah, semantics is back in some variety for some time. So yeah, uh, thank y'all for being here, and I hope you have
Thank
a
you.
great rest of your. Bye, y'all.
Yeah. Thank you. Bye.